So, what does it take to make it rain after a 150-year drought? The answer isn't about weather patterns or climate science. Nope, it's something much, much deeper. Today, we're jumping into a really powerful story from Fiji that connects one single fatal mistake to this incredible truth about how we heal and the real power of forgiveness. But let's start with a question for you. When you meet someone new, maybe someone from a totally different culture or background, what's the first thing you notice? It's okay, it's just human nature to see the differences, right? To kind of compare. I mean, our brains are basically wired to categorize things. The source material points out a few of these surface-level observations people might make. It's just how we try to make sense of the world. But what happens when our simple little observations run head-on into a reality we don't understand at all? Well, that's where things get tricky, because that simple habit of comparing can go from a harmless observation to a pretty dangerous judgment really fast. It can build these invisible walls between us, and in some cases, those walls can become deadly. Which brings us, really, to the heart of our story today. Okay, so let's go back in time. We're heading to the Fijian Islands in the 19th century for a story about a fatal misunderstanding, one that would echo for generations to come. So it all starts in 1867. A British missionary, Reverend Thomas Baker, shows up in this remote Fijian village. And at first, things are going pretty well, until a really, really important cultural rule gets broken. And as you can see, the aftermath of that, well, it leads to a violent act that casts this shadow for over 150 years. Now, to really get what happened next, we have to understand a pretty difficult part of the culture back then: cannibalism. But it wasn't what you might be thinking. This quote from our source explains it perfectly. "We didn't eat people because we were hungry, we ate them to take their strength." It was a spiritual act, a way to literally take on an enemy's power. And this brings us to the most important, absolutely unbreakable rule at the center of this whole story. A chief's head was sacred. Touching it wasn't just rude, it was a deep insult, an offense that was punishable by death. Period. And then the mistake happened. Reverend Baker, who had no idea about this custom, just reaches out and takes a comb from the chief's hair. For the warriors watching, the verdict was instant. This was an insult that could not be forgiven. So, bound by their traditions, they took action, and the missionary was killed right there on the spot. But that single act of violence, born from this huge cultural clash, didn't end there, not by a long shot. It cast a long, dark shadow over the entire village, creating what their descendants would later call a curse. I mean, just think about that. 150 years. That's generations of people born and dying under the weight of that one single moment. A century and a half of consequences just passed down from parent to child. And the villagers truly believed that this single act had brought a curse on them. For all those 150 years, their land was barren. Rain just didn't fall. The whole community suffered, and they passed that story down, the story of the missionary, as the reason why. But after a century and a half of this hardship, the community decided that enough was enough. They knew they had to do something. They had to face the past head on if they ever wanted to break the cycle. So, get this. In 2003, the descendants of that tribe did something absolutely remarkable. They tracked down Reverend Baker's living relatives from all over the world and invited them to come to Fiji. And there, in this incredible ceremony, they stood up and formally confessed what their ancestors did, and they humbly asked for forgiveness. And what happened next is just astounding. Right after that ceremony of reconciliation, the sky just opened up. It poured rain nonstop for a solid week. It broke the 150-year drought, and the land became fertile again. Actually, it became one of the best areas for farming in all of Fiji. Now, you can call it a coincidence if you want, but for the villagers, the message couldn't have been clearer. The key that broke the curse, the only way out of a generational cycle of pain and suffering, was forgiveness. That was the act that finally unlocked their healing. So what's so fascinating about this huge, epic story is that it's actually a massive metaphor for our own lives. We might not have 150-year-old communal curses, but man, we build our own internal walls that hold us back, don't we? The source material calls these inner walls, the personal chains that we carry around. And you probably recognize some of these. Things like unforgiveness for other people or even for ourselves, that constant need to compare ourselves to others, the need to be in control, feelings of shame, pride, or just holding on to old hurts. And here's the connection, the big takeaway. Just like that 150-year-old grudge seemed to make the land itself barren, these internal struggles, they can create a kind of spiritual or emotional drought in our own lives. They leave us feeling stuck, unproductive, and totally cut off from any real growth. So we're left with this one last, really powerful question. If a single act of forgiveness could literally break a 150-year drought in Fiji, what grudge are you holding on to? What act of forgiveness, maybe towards someone else, or maybe even towards yourself, could be the key to finally changing the climate of your life?